Of quorum, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during the committee meeting. We have no ceremonial activities today. I'll move to the clerk to find out whether there are any changes to the agenda. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chair, there are no changes to the agenda, but there was a correction to page 2 of Appendix A for item 7.3, the 2018 fourth quarter emergency and non-competitive procurement reports.
Okay, thank you for that. Need an electronic vote then to approve the agenda as presented. Moved by Vanderbeek, seconded by Johnson. All those in favor? Carries, thank you. Any declarations of interest this morning? Hearing none, I'm going to move on to the approval of the minutes from our March the 21st meeting. It's moved by Wilson, seconded by Clark. All those in favor? Carries, thank you. You have consent items 7.1 to 7.5 in front of you. I'll move through them individually. The first one is the Hamilton Aboriginal Advisory Committee minutes from February 7th. Questions or comments on 7.1? Nope. I need a mover then and a seconder. Moved by Vanderbeek, seconded by Pearson. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you, because that is a motion to receive. 7.2 is the 2018 fourth quarter request for tenders and proposals. And I have Councillor Clark on 7.2. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to understand when they says that the tender is under review, what would it be under review for?
Through the chair. When it says under review, they haven't recommended that an award yet. They're reviewing pricing, they're reviewing to ensure that it complies with the specifications and that sort of thing.
So it's just the end part of the process?
It's just normal part of the process, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, on the balance of 7.2, moved by Johnson, seconded by Wilson. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you. 7.3 is the 2018 fourth quarter emergency and non-competitive procurement report. Councillor Clark on 7.3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a lot of emergency non-competitive procurements. So who assesses these after I'm assuming this is after the fact, or are they being approved before they actually go out?
Through the chair. They are approved at the department level prior to the work being engaged.
And so then how do we ensure that it was proper, that they were done in this manner as an emergency as opposed to following the normal tender process? Who has oversight over that decision?
Through the chair. All these items come to procurement for review eventually. If in fact we did identify one that we didn't feel was a true emergency, then we would raise the issue and probably report it as a policy 19. But in fact, having looked at these for years, the ones that are classified as emergency do tend to be really emergency situations. I can't think of any off the top of my head where they went through initially as an emergency and we ended up determining that they really didn't qualify. There's a fairly tight definition of what qualifies as an emergency in regards to cessation of business, endangerment to the public or employees, that type of definition.
Yeah, so I mean, it's challenging for us sitting here, for me, I'll speak about myself, but I see the amount, I see the name of the company, and the division. And so it's kind of hard to understand what the emergency is. I see one here for New Hope Community Bikes, Hamilton Video and Sound for the police department. Not sure how that would be an emergency. I could go through, there's a whole bunch of them in here that I just don't understand. Mercanti Specialty Foods for fleet and facilities. I'm not sure how that would qualify as an emergency under fleet and facilities for $14,000 worth of food.
Through the chair, if you look at the type It will indicate whether it's an emergency, an extension of a purchase order to allow us to engage in a competitive process, whether it was single source or emergency, EMERG. And there are very few ones on here that are actually an emergency. There's one for Black Creek Contracting for parks, and there's another one for Eaton Industries Company and Rankin Construction. So the vast majority of these are not emergency.
Okay, thank you. That helps me an awful lot. And so as a single source then, again, what's the process? When is it permitted to single source something out? I mean, I look at this and I think, you could actually get some competitive bids across the board if it went through a process.
Through the chair, when policy 11 is engaged for any purpose, the department are required to basically put together a business case to indicate why it should not go through a competitive process. It may be a situation where it's a vendor that's the authorized rep for that particular brand and they're the only one in the area, so that would be a single source. It could be a single source for such things as, in the old days, Hydro doing work on streets and such. If the councillor, if you would like any more detailed information on any of this, we'd be happy to provide you with what explanation the department put on in regards to their business case to get the single source approved.
So I'm just, I still don't I'm sorry, but I don't understand the oversight. I don't understand. It looks like the single sources are issued and now it's here they are, and that's the end of it. I don't see where there's any tension in the system to ensure that we're actually doing proper RFPs and ensuring that we're actually getting value for money.
Through the chair, as I indicated previously, all the policy 10 and 11 documentation comes through to procurement, and the manager of procurement and her crew review them all and would identify any ones that weren't in compliance with the policy. At one point in time, the procurement policy used to require that they had to be approved by the manager of procurement, and council changed that probably about 10 years ago and put the onus back on the GM and the directors within the department for approving them, with procurement reviewing them after the fact and reporting the quarterly usage to committee and council. Procurement, if they do see a situation where there is an opportunity for a competitive procurement process in the future, they will put that in place. Such as procurement, when they start looking at these, may see that a couple of different departments are using the same vendor for very similar things, and then procurement would say, wait a minute, as a corporation, we have a larger need than your individual department. We need to go out for a competitive process in the future, and they'd be sort of bringing those people to the table to put together that RFP or tender to get competitive pricing in the future.
Okay, so I'm just looking at the bottom of page 3 of 3, and I see a number of them that are close to 100,000 or exceeding 100,000. A key shop, single sourced. SNC Lavalin, well, they're in the news a lot, so I don't want to pick on them anymore. I'm sorry, I honestly don't understand where the oversight is. Like these, in my mind, from personal experience, I've seen it in other governments that as we become more complacent, we just automatically sign off on single sourcing, and we have no idea whether there's tension in the system, whether or not we're actually getting true value for money. And if we continue to single source to these corporations, I can assure you that the numbers and the costs will ratchet up because they figure, well, they're just going to single source it anyways.
So through the chair, if I could just comment to the assignments greater than 100,000. Under our delegated authorities, general managers have authority up to 100,000. Greater than 100,000 up to 250,000 must be approved through the city manager. And sorry, did I not say 250,000? Sorry, I meant to say 250. From 100,000 to 250,000. I review each and every one of those purchase orders with respect to questions where I have questions around policy 11 single source or any other purchase orders. I refer them back to the general managers for review as it relates to the rationale for single sourcing, and I have been doing that on occasion with specific purchase orders. For instance, there were 2 this week with respect to, I believe, furic acid at the wastewater treatment plant, and it was an extension as they prepared to go out to market, and I believe it was a 4-month extension. So in terms of process, it is the city manager who reviews all purchase orders of a value greater than $100,000 up to $250,000.
And then it's just the department head manager that does everything under 100,000.
Through the chair, the general manager has authority up to 100,000. Sorry, through the chair, Tina just identified for policy 11s, they have authority up to 250,000, but again, I do review those as well.
Through the chair, the councillor previously asked about the Ottawa Key Shop. In the verbiage of the report, we outline the larger issues, and one of the ones on page 3 or 4 is Ottawa Key Shop, and that had to do with the fact that they're a licensed dealer for CABA Peak System, Interior Master Key System, and various managed facilities, and in order to give our managed facilities people a chance to complete a review and subsequent formulation of action plans to move forward with a comprehensive process for services in the future. So in this case, they're authorized for that particular type of systems that we have in place, and the department is in the process of looking to see what they're going to do in the future in the way of securing those kind of services.
Okay, I think, Mr. Chairman, I'll let it go. I'll review the policies, but I'm really concerned that there's an awful lot going out the door that, when you add it up, it's a great deal of money without a competitive bid.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes, sorry, thank you. Asked and answered some concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. So on 7.3, moved by Pearson, seconded by Clark. All those in favor? Carries. Thank you. 7.4, similar report, 4th quarter non-compliance with procurement policy. Questions or comments on that? If not, I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Vanderbeek, seconded by Pearson. All those in favor? Carries. Thank you. 7.5 is the interview subcommittee to the Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee. Questions or comments on 7.5? Moved by Johnson, seconded by Wilson. All those in favor? Carries. Thank you. 8.1, public delegations. We have Vince DiPietro from Angelica Homes respecting a rental property's water bill. This was approved on January the 17th. I'll ask Mr. DiPietro to make your, sir, you're this morning for the delegation? If you can just make your way down to the podium here, sir. Thank you.
The chair.
You have 5 minutes, sir, if you
Yep,
mind.
just simple. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My question or concern is I have a rental property that I had a tenant there that's occupied it for 1.5 years, and he's going through some personal problems. He has depression issues. He lost his job, and he neglected to control the water volume on the outside tap. So my question is, in regards to the cost that I incurred was basically $2,400. They charged me for the water and the sewage wastage, and it was the outside tap. So I'm looking for some leniency and hoping that it's understandable that I should be charged only maybe for the usage of water or less, as I did not use the sewage. That's it.
Okay. Any questions of Mr. DiPietro before I move to receive the delegation and we can turn it over to questions to staff? None this morning? Okay. Motion then to receive the delegation, moved by Pearson, seconded by Vanderbeek. All those in favor, that carries. Thank you, sir. I could just ask you to sit in the audience, and I'll now allow the members of the committee to ask staff some questions, if that's the case. So 8.1A you have in front of you, and I'll turn to Councillor Johnson first. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my question's to Mr. Savoy. John, I know in the past when we've had sod farms, et cetera, and when they're not using the sewer system, is there a provision in residential when it's, and I don't know how we prove the fact that it was an outside hose and not the inside tap, is there any provisions? Has there been any precedent setting up to now about canceling the sewer charge?
Through the chair, firstly, on the non-residential, we don't have any allowance for, say, a sod farm to abate their, if they were using potable water for their irrigation. Yeah, that even holds for golf courses. So we do have the wastewater abatement program available to industrial commercial customers under certain conditions, but water used for irrigation is not eligible under that program.
Okay.
So they would have to pay for it. I have been contacted in the past from some private property owners that have facilities like soccer pitches, and have asked for an exemption or on, say, as an irrigation meter, but we don't. We charge the wastewater based on 100% of the water you use on the meter, and that holds for all residences.
So simply put, there really isn't any provisions whatsoever, especially on residential or commercial, to alleviate some of the sewer charges. It's not there.
Through the chair, no, we've not done any type of exemptions before, so it would be up to committee if they should so desire.
Okay, so there's been no precedent setting up to now.
Not in the 13 years I've been here, no.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I could ask Councillor Wilson just to take the chair for a second. John, we have not had an opportunity to meet with the gentleman about the billing issue that is in front of us this morning?
I've not had any direct discussion. He has had discussions with Electra based on notes that they've provided me.
Okay. And do you have a description of the events that have occurred? If so, could you just relay them to us?
Through the chair, it was provided as information provided to committee on here. So there was a larger reading found on September 14th, and following following their normal protocol, they would Electra would have reread the meter, which they did, and they did invoice it, that large bill. There was another subsequent large bill. There has been some contact with the landlord property owner, and I believe I have that on the first page of 5 on the summary. The landlord contacted Electra on November 22nd regarding the high bills, and in turn, Electra advised that the meter reading has been verified as accurate. They did indicate that payment is due within 60 days, or otherwise it would be transferred over. On December 28th, the landlord contacted Electra, and at that point advised that the tenant may have left the water running outdoors continuously, and then questioned the city's policy of charging wastewater on the full metered water consumption. Electra advised that that is the city's policy, and that if they wish to dispute it, that they could come forward as a delegation to this committee.
Okay. Thanks for the summary. I'll take the chair back from Councillor Wilson. Any other questions or comments on it before okay, motion then to receive the supporting documentation that was provided by staff, moved by Pearson, second by Clark. All those in favor? Councillor Clark?
So I just, in terms of the delegate, he can go to a small claims court to go after the tenant for the money. It's not covered under our policy, but there is an avenue for you to go after the tenant in terms of the actual costs that you incurred as a result of it. So that would be one suggestion. We're in a box. Thank you.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Carries. Thank you. We don't have anything under items 9, 10, or 11. I will call on the committee for notices and motions. Any notices and motions this morning? Nope, hearing none. General information? Mike, Brian, anything?
Through the chair, I'll just draw committee's attention to a communication that was just sent out this morning regarding an announcement with respect to federal funding for shoreline protection. It's a federal commitment of 40% funding on a gross investment of about $31 million. That represents about $12 million in federal funding and a $19 million local commitment. And as the communication identifies, staff will report back to a future GIC with respect to a financing strategy as we better understand the criteria of the funding program.
Very good. On that, Councillor Clark.
So on a separate federal matter, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure whether or not this is the correct committee, but I look to your judgment and staff's. I understand that the federal government is promoting international trade corridors, border crossings, things along that line. I understand that New York State is very interested in having another border crossing somewhere between, I guess, Fort Erie and Niagara-on-the-Lake area. I also, when I read the report, it sounded like the feds were willing to help fund any study work on an international trade corridor. So can we reach out to the Minister of Transport and find out exactly what is available?
So through the chair, the councillor is correct. If committee members recall, through the federal budget, I believe there are 4 envelopes as it relates to infrastructure funding. And one of those envelopes is very focused on opportunities for trade and economic development. So we can do some further review of that program, and we can look at the opportunity of engaging Transport Canada as it relates to the parameters of that program as to what is eligible for funding. And if there is an opportunity for a study, is we can report back and get committee and council's approval to submit a application for such a study.
I think that would be helpful because as I read the understanding is that the corridor would have rail as well as road, perhaps even interregional transit along that route. I know Niagara is interested in it, but I don't see anyone stepping up to make the inquiries, and I would hate to see that money lost when we could use it. I don't want to spend municipal money on a study if the feds are actually stepping up to do it. I know the rail corridor would be very helpful along there too, as well as the highway.
So through the chair, as well as we can reach out to our Niagara region counterparts and other adjacent municipalities to see if there's an interest as it relates to a joint application or submission.
Yeah, it was brought to my attention by MP Vance Badaway. I guess he sat on the committee along with the local member Bob Bertina. So I would appreciate that. I guess direction, we don't need a motion on that, but and then if it could come back to the appropriate committee, I don't know where it would go from here, but at least we should have a discussion about it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, sounds good. Leave it with Mike.
So through the chair, again, we can review and we can send just a memo, and if it's the will of committee, and that may be appropriate at GIC, to provide some direction to staff as it relates to next steps.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other business? Hearing none, then we'll move on to 14.1, which is the appointment to various City of Hamilton advisory committees for 2018-2022 term. It is a private and confidential report. If you have any questions, we would be required to move into camera. If not, then I'm going to turn to Councillor Wilson for a motion that the recommendation be approved and released publicly following the approval at council. Questions to go RE in camera, or are we just moving this and moving it on? Okay. Councillor Wilson, then. I'm going to turn to you for the motion, then. It's moved by Councillor Wilson and seconded by Councillor Johnson. All those in favor? It does require our electronic vote. And it carries, and then I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Vanderbeek, seconded by Pearson. All those in favor? Carries.